The thermos clicked open in a room full of teeth. Danny set his bag down first. The student pulled out a steel cylinder dented on one side, unscrewed the cap and took a long sip as if 4 apex predators were just another Tuesday. 5 Deathworlders had been assigned to classroom 7C. One of them was human. The class had not yet started, the galaxy had not yet changed, but something was already shifting. A Garden World student fainted in the back row. Danny lowered the thermos and looked at the empty seat in the center of the reinforced circle. Is that one free? Nobody answered. The 6-legged lupin's bioluminescent stripes pulsed a warning red. The serpentine creature's 4 arms coiled tight against his torso. The massive biped's dorsal nodes crackled with static electricity. The winged shadow in the corner made the air 10 degrees colder. Danny shrugged and sat. He pulled out his data pad, scrolled through the syllabus and yawned. So what did I miss? The part that still keeps me up at night, that comes later. 3 hours earlier, Pip Saren's ears had not yet learned to stop shaking. His data pad slipped through trembling fingers and clattered against the corridor floor of Nexus Academy Station. He bent to retrieve it, fur damp with station sweat, left ear twitching in the arrhythmic pattern that meant his brain was still processing fear. The roster glared up at him from the cracked screen. 5 names, 5 Deathworlders, 1 classroom. This has to be a mistake, he whispered. A passing Melodron instructor glanced at him with color-shifting skin that flickered concern. Director Orville's initiative, she said, voice like wind through chimes. Boundaries exist to be pushed. Pip's ears pressed flat against his skull. He had heard the rumors. The ancient shelled being who ran Nexus Academy believed that fear was a curriculum flaw, not a survival mechanism. But Pip was Fenari. His people had evolved on a garden world where the most dangerous predator was an overripe fruit. He had not applied to this academy to become prey. He scrolled again. Seth Vorek's Deathworld designation. Ra Crixian Deathworld designation. Gorith Thunderback Deathworld designation. Nyx Shadehunter Deathworld designation. And the 5th name flagged in crimson. Reeves Danny. Human Deathworld Class 12. Pip did not know what Deathworld Class 12 meant. He knew only that the security teams had installed reinforced seating in Classroom 7C, that armed guards now stood at every entrance. That Chief Varric had personally overseen the installation of sedation systems in the ceiling panels. The rule was absolute: apex predators did not share space. The rule was absolute: Deathworlders were contained, not taught. The rule was absolute: fear was the only rational response. Pip's left ear twitched again. He did not notice the figure approaching until the smell hit him. Dark roasted alien. Coffee. Danny Reeves walked through the door of Classroom 7C carrying a battered steel thermos and the casual exhaustion of a man who had just woken from a nap. Pip watched from his observation corner, data pad clutched like a shield. The human was average height, brown hair, tired eyes. His clothes were simple, unmarked by family crest or academy insignia. Nothing about him suggested Deathworld capability, nothing about him suggested anything at all. Except the thermos. It was dented on one side, the metal worn smooth by years of handling. Faded Earth script circled the base. Pip could not read the words from this distance, but he would later learn what they said. Danny set the thermos on his desk and took another sip. Instructor Paleth entered next. The Melodron veteran's hands shook as she addressed the room, her multiple vocal chambers producing a harmony that wobbled off-key. Welcome to Interspecies Relations Theory. Please find your assigned seats. The predators had already claimed theirs. Seth occupied the northern position, 6 legs tucked beneath armored plating, bioluminescent stripes dimmed to a sullen blue. The station's climate control ran cold and Vorek's pack kinship relied on body heat. Seth shivered. It was a small thing, a barely visible tremor along his flank, but Pip caught it. Danny caught it too. You look cold, the human said. Seth's stripes flared warning orange. His secondary legs extended, claws clicking against the reinforced floor. Danny unzipped his jacket. The fabric was worn soft, faded from some original color that might have been blue, or rather, it had been blue before he'd worn it through 3 winters. Where I come from, Danny said, we help people when they're uncomfortable. He held the jacket out. The classroom held its breath. Paleth's vocal chambers stalled mid-note. The sedation systems in the ceiling panels hummed to standby. Seth's stripes flickered, not threat, not submission, something Pip had no word for in any of the 4 languages he spoke. The Vorex leaned forward, sniffed the jacket. His bioluminescent patterns shifted from orange to a tentative, questioning amber. Then he took it. Danny nodded and turned back to his data pad as if he had just borrowed a stylus. Seth wrapped the worn fabric around his shoulders, the stripes warmed to a pale gold. Pip's ears twitched. He checked the roster again. Deathworld Class 12. He pulled up the Academy database with trembling fingers. The entry loaded in fragments as if the system itself hesitated to display the information. Earth Death World Class 12, rated more lethal than 94% of known inhabited worlds. Pip read the sentence 3 times. It did not change. He looked up at Danny, who was now highlighting sections of his syllabus with the focused attention of a man repairing a grain silo. The human had just given his only jacket to a 6-legged armored wolf. He had done it without hesitation, without performance, without any apparent understanding that he was supposed to be afraid. Pip's right ear twitched, his left ear stayed flat. Something was wrong with this picture, he could not yet say what. Ra arrived late. The Crixian moved through the doorway with the fluid economy of a creature built for ambush. His vertical pupils scanned the room, forked tongue tasting the air for threat signatures. He had not expected to find a human sitting calmly among predators. His tongue froze. Danny looked up from his data pad, mourning. Ra did not respond. He settled into his assigned position, 4 arms coiling into a defensive ready state, and fixed his gaze on the human. The stare lasted 12 seconds, Pip counted. Then Ra growled. The sound was subsonic, felt in the sternum before heard. Paleth's hands shook so badly she dropped her stylus. The armed guards at the door shifted their grip on their weapons. Danny set down his data pad. He met Ra's eyes, did not look away, did not posture. "You're testing me?" Danny said. His voice was quiet, conversational, the same tone he had used to offer the jacket. "We have pack animals on my world too. You're not going to eat me, you're curious, big difference." Ra's forked tongue flickered, once, twice. He did not growl again. But he did not look away either. The stare continued, a new tension threading through it, not threat, assessment. Pip felt the shift in his chest before his mind caught up. The room was still dangerous, the predators were still apex, but the geometry had changed. The human had become a fixed point around which the danger reorganized itself. Danny picked up his thermos and took another sip. The coffee smell filled the space between them, dark, roasted, completely out of place. Seth's nose twitched beneath the borrowed jacket. Ra's tongue tasted the air again, and this time his pupils dilated with something that might have been recognition. Paleth found her voice. "Today we will discuss territorial behavior in mixed-species environments." The lesson began. Pip tried to take notes. His data pad recorded only half-sentences, fragments of observation that his fear-addled brain could not yet assemble into meaning. Danny answered questions with the plain directness of someone who had never learned to perform intelligence. When Paleth asked about dominance hierarchies, he said, "Where I come from, the biggest bull doesn't always lead the herd. Sometimes the one who remembers where the water is becomes the one everyone follows." When she asked about threat assessment, he said, "We had a saying on my farm, the animal that needs to show you its teeth has already lost." Ra's tongue stilled at that. Seth's stripes warmed another degree. Pip noticed something else. Danny's left hand, the one not holding the thermos, was wrapped in bandages, not fresh bandages. The fabric was stained, worn, the wrapping practiced and habitual. Scar tissue peeked from beneath the edges. The human had been injured before. Many times, perhaps, he wore the evidence like a farmer wore calluses. Pip's ears twitched in opposite directions. His left ear, the one that processed fear, stayed flat. His right ear, the one that processed curiosity, began to lift. The next day Danny brought food. Not Academy ration packs, not synthesized protein cubes. He arrived with 4 separate containers, each researched, each specific. For Seth, raw protein slabs, still bleeding, the iron content calculated to Vorek's metabolic needs. For Ra, salted mineral blocks arranged in the spiral pattern that Crixian ambush hunters preferred for territory marking. For Goreth, conductive nutrient paste laced with trace minerals that would support his dorsal node function. For Nyx, dark prepared nutrient gel, light absorbent, served in a shallow dish that would not reflect her heat-sensitive vision. He set them down in the center of the reinforced circle and returned to his seat. "On Earth," Danny said, "we share food with people we care about." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of calculations too complex for Pip to follow. Seth's nose worked the air above the raw protein. Ra's tongue extended, tasting the mineral arrangement. Gorith's massive form shifted, dorsal nodes sparking with involuntary static. Nyx, who had not spoken since arriving, leaned forward from her shadowed corner. One by one they ate. Not from the containers directly. That would have been claiming, dominating, taking. Instead, each predator pulled their portion back to their assigned position. Seth dragged his protein slab with a secondary claw, Ra coiled around his mineral spiral. Gorith cupped the conductive paste in broad palms. Nyx absorbed the gel through her dermis, a slow darkening of her heat-absorbent skin. They ate facing inward, toward Danny, toward each other. Pip watched the geometry shift again. The predators had arrived as points of isolated danger. Now they formed a shape, a circle, unconscious, irreversible. Danny sipped his coffee and reviewed his notes. The sedation systems in the ceiling panels remained dormant. Chief Varric visited on the third day. The security chief was scarred across every visible surface, a veteran of campaigns Pip did not want to imagine. He walked the perimeter of classroom 7C with the methodical attention of a man calculating blast radiuses. His eyes kept returning to Danny. Not with fear, with something else. Pip overheard him speaking to Palith in the corridor. The human is not the variable we prepared for. The protocols are clear, Palith said. Her hands still shook, but less now, only when she addressed the predators directly. When she looked at Danny, the shaking stopped. The protocols, Varric said, assume dominance displays, they assume territorial aggression, they do not account for. He paused, searched for a word. Agriculture. He left without explaining. Pip's ears twitched. He had not considered it before, but Varric was right. Danny moved like a man who had spent years negotiating with forces larger than himself. Weather. Crop failure, machinery that could crush a hand in a heartbeat. He did not posture because posturing was irrelevant to the actual work of survival. The human was not ignoring the danger, he was contextualizing it. It returned to his observation corner and opened a new file. He began recording details he had previously dismissed as meaningless. The way Danny's bandaged left hand never trembled, even when Gorith's dorsal nodes crackled loud enough to make the floor vibrate. The way he always arrived 5 minutes early, thermos in hand, and always left the room exactly as he found it. The way he spoke to each predator in slightly different patterns. Shorter sentences for Ra, longer explanations for Gorith. Silent presence for Nyx. He was not treating them as a category. He was treating them as individuals. Pip's right ear lifted fully. His left ear still pressed flat, but the twitch had changed its rhythm. The fourth day brought the storm. Gorith's dorsal nodes had been building charge since morning, a low-frequency hum that made Pip's teeth ache. The Thunderback was struggling with the station's artificial gravity, his massive frame calibrated for a world where electrical storms walked on two legs. His nodes sparked. The lights in classroom 7C flickered. Other students had stopped attending. The Garden World contingent now watched from the observation deck, pressed against reinforced glass, ears flat, fur bristling. Only Pip remained in the room itself. Danny noticed Gorith's distress before Palith did. The human stood, walked to the center of the circle. The thermos stayed on his desk, lid open, coffee steaming. "May I?" Danny asked. Gorith's small eyes, buried deep in mineral-plated sockets, fixed on him. The nodes crackled louder. A warning, a display, the thunder before the strike. Danny did not flinch. He extended his right hand, palm up. Then, slowly, he placed it between Gorith's shoulder nodes. The electricity did not strike. It tingled. Pip could see the hair on Danny's arm standing straight, could smell the ozone sharpness in the air. But the charge that should have knocked a Garden Worlder unconscious simply waited. "Trust is not given to the safe," Danny said. His voice was barely audible over the node hum. "On my world, the storm doesn't care if you're worthy. It cares if you're present." Gorith's nodes pulsed, not in the random crackle of distress, in a pattern rhythmic, almost musical. Danny held the position for 11 seconds. Then he withdrew his hand, nodded, and returned to his seat. Gorith's hum dropped to a subsonic thrum that vibrated in Pip's chest rather than his ears. The Thunderback's massive head bowed, not in submission but in something that looked uncomfortably like gratitude. Pip's data pad recorded the moment. He would review it later, frame by frame, searching for the exact instant when the rules had changed. He would not find it. The change had happened too slowly to be a moment, too completely to be a decision. Nyx followed him. Not in the classroom, in the corridors. In the maintenance passages where station light failed and shadows pooled like liquid. Pip saw her only as temperature drops, as the sudden absence of heat in a corridor that had been warm a step before. Danny walked these passages without lights. He seemed to navigate by the thermos in his hand, the familiar weight of it as if the object were a compass. On the fifth evening, in corridor 9B where the shadows hung heaviest, Danny stopped. He did not turn around, he simply held out his left hand, the bandaged one, into the darkness behind him. "I cannot promise safety," he said, "but I can promise you will not be alone." The temperature drop intensified. Pip, watching from the corridor junction, felt his breath frost in the air. Then a wing brushed Danny's shoulder. Dark, membranous, silent. Nyx stepped into the dim light, her multi-spectrum eyes reflecting nothing, her heat-absorbent dermis drinking the station's feeble illumination. She did not speak, she did not need to, her presence was the answer. Danny lowered his hand. Together, human and shade hunter, they walked the rest of the corridor in silence. Pip remained at the junction long after they had gone. His ears twitched in patterns he did not recognize. Not fear, not anymore, something larger, more complicated, still sorting itself into meaning. He thought of the database entry, Deathworld Class 12, 94%. He thought of Danny's bandaged hand, the thermos, the jacket that Seth still wore, now smelling of Vorex and human in equal measure. He thought of the circle that had formed in classroom 7C, unconscious, irreversible. And he thought, with a clarity that made his left ear finally lift to match his right, that the Academy had prepared for the wrong threat entirely. They had built sedation systems and reinforced seating and armed guard rotations. They had predicted dominance fights and territorial bloodshed. They had not predicted coffee. The drone came from Maintenance Shaft Gamma 7, and it was not supposed to be armed. The drone came from Maintenance Shaft Gamma 7, and it was not supposed to be armed. Pip heard it before he saw it. A high whine of servos pushed beyond tolerance, metal grinding against metal in a frequency that made his molars ache. Then the corridor filled with light. The maintenance drone had shed its housing somewhere in the shaft, exposing spinning alloy blades that caught the station's emergency lighting and threw shards of brightness across the walls. It rounded the corner at speed. Pip froze, his ears pressed flat, his left one twitching in the arrhythmic stutter of a brain that had stopped processing and started simply screaming. The drone was heading toward the Commons refectory, toward the Garden World lunch period, toward 200 students who had never evolved a reflex for mechanical death. Danny stepped into its path. The human moved without shouting, without running, without any of the theatrical urgency that Pip associated with heroism. He simply placed himself between the drone and the corridor junction, bandaged left hand raised, right hand reaching for the machine's undercarriage. The blades hit his palm. Blood sprayed, not dramatic arcs, not cinematic fountains, but a fine mist that coated the drone's exposed circuitry and turned the emergency lights red. Danny's fingers found the power core housing. His grip tightened. The servos whined louder, fighting him, blades chewing into the meat of his hand. Then the whine stopped. Danny crushed the power core with 5 fingers and the weight of his shoulder behind it. The drone sputtered, sparked, and died. Its blades slowed, stuttered, and finally hung still, dripping red onto the station floor. Danny looked at his hand. The bandages were shredded. Fresh blood mixed with old scar tissue in patterns too complex for Pip to read. "That was annoying," Danny said. He walked to the wall-mounted emergency kit, wrapped his hand in fresh gauze with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, and continued toward the Commons as if the drone had been a puddle he had stepped around. Pip remained in the corridor. He stared at the destroyed machine. He stared at the blood on the floor. He stared at the fresh bandages on Danny's hand, and he understood something that made his right ear lift while his left ear stayed flat. The scar tissue had not been from one incident. It was a record, a ledger. This was not new behavior. This was habit. Seth found him in the observation ring that evening. The Vorex had not returned the jacket. He still wore it, Danny's worn fabric draped over armored plating, bioluminescent stripes pulsing a warm amber that matched the starlight filtering through the viewing deck's transparent hull. He stood beside Danny in silence, 6 legs planted in the grounded stance of a creature who had chosen his position and would not be moved. Ra arrived next. The Crixian did not growl. He simply coiled his 4 arms into a posture that Pip had learned to read as protective readiness and faced the starfield with vertical pupils narrowed against the light. Gorith's nodes crackled softly, a subsonic thrum that vibrated through the deck plating. He stood at Danny's other side, massive form casting a shadow that could have swallowed a garden worlder whole. Nyx was already there. Pip had not seen her arrive. He only noticed the temperature drop, the 10-degree chill that marked her presence, and the dark wing that brushed Danny's uninjured shoulder. They stood in a line, not a circle now, a wall. Pip watched from the doorway, data pad forgotten in his hands. He had come to ask about the drone, to demand explanations, to file reports, to do the things that a communication student was supposed to do when violence interrupted academy routine. Instead, he watched Danny pull out his thermos and take a sip. The coffee smell mixed with the ozone of Gorith's nodes and the cold metal scent of the observation deck. It should have been discordant. It should have been wrong. It smelled like a pack. You destroyed the drone, Pip said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. Danny lowered the thermos. It was going to hurt people. Your hand will heal. Danny flexed his bandaged fingers. The movement was stiff but functional. Where I come from, machinery breaks, you fix it. Sometimes it breaks while you're fixing it. You learn to work around the blood. Seth's stripes flickered. The pattern was complex, layered, speaking in colors that Pip's Fenari eyes could not fully translate, but he caught the edge of it. Concern, not for the injury, for the casualness with which Danny wore it. Ra's tongue flickered. You did not hesitate. No, Danny said. You did not calculate survival odds. No. You stepped into the blade. Ra's voice was clipped, heavy with sibilance, each word landing like a stone. Why? Danny looked at his thermos. The dented side caught the starlight. The faded earth script seemed to glow. Because I was there, he said, and I could. The silence that followed was not empty. Pip felt it press against his ears, a physical weight. The pack was not speaking. They were listening. And what they heard in Danny's plain words was something that made Gorith's nodes pulse in the rhythmic pattern Pip had seen in the classroom, made Seth's stripes warm to a gold so bright it hurt to look at, made Nyx's wing press closer to Danny's shoulder. Pip's data pad recorded none of this. Some moments he was learning could not be captured in notes. The next morning, Security Chief Varric visited classroom 7C. He did not enter. He stood in the corridor, visible through the open door, and watched the lesson with the calculating attention of a man reading a battlefield. His eyes moved from predator to predator, cataloging body language, assessing threat levels, building profiles. Then they stopped on Danny. Varric's expression did not change, but his hand moved to his belt, to the data pad clipped there, and he typed something with the speed of a man who had done this 10,000 times before. Pip was in the corridor, ostensibly retrieving a stylus he had dropped. He was not eavesdropping, he was simply present. He heard Varric's muttered words, meant for his own ears or perhaps for the record he was updating. Threat level extreme, do not engage, do not separate from pack. Pip's ears twitched. The words were wrong. They did not match the scene in the classroom where Danny was helping Seth navigate a translation exercise and Gorith's nodes hummed a contented subsonic accompaniment. Threat level extreme, Varric repeated. He looked up from his data pad and met Pip's eyes. The scarred veteran did not smile. Do you understand what you're watching, Fenari? Pip did not yet. He's not the threat, Varric said. He nodded toward the classroom, toward Danny's average height and tired eyes and bandaged hand wrapped around a steel thermos. He never was, it's what he builds, what he makes possible. Varric clipped his data pad back to his belt. He walked away without another word, boots clicking against the station floor in a rhythm that sounded almost like retreat. Pip stood in the corridor long after he had gone. He thought about the file update. He thought about Varric's eyes, which had not been afraid of Danny but afraid of what Danny could assemble. The threat was not the human, the threat was the pack. And the Academy had no protocol for that. Corvith Bren chose Corridor 9B because it had no cameras. The heavy-gravity humanoid blocked the passage with the planted stance of a creature who expected the ground to resist him. His calcified shoulder ridges caught the dim maintenance lighting and threw shadows that seemed to have weight. 7 others stood behind him, Bren family heavies with the same slate-gray hide, the same deep-set eyes, the same family crest tattooed across their throats. Danny had been tying his shoe. He finished the double knot, stood up, and looked at the blockade with the same tired patience he had shown the drone. Can I help you? Corvith's voice was gravel in a drum. You are the human. The Deathworld. I am. You sit with predators. Corvith took a step forward. The floor plating groaned under his weight. You think this makes you safe. You think this makes you one of them. Danny set his bag down. The thermos was in his hand, then it wasn't. Pip, watching from the junction 30 meters back, could not track when he had set it aside. The human's hands were empty now, both of them, the bandaged left and the scarred right. I think, Danny said, that everyone is afraid of something. Corvith shoved him. The impact should have sent a garden worlder through the wall. Danny absorbed it like stone. His feet did not slide, his shoulders did not roll. He simply took the mass and distributed it through his frame, the way a farmer braces against a grain silo door in high wind. Deathworld Class 12, Danny said. His voice had not changed, still quiet, still conversational. Do you know what that means? Corvith raised a fist, the 7 heavies spread wide, blocking every exit. It means, Danny said, that my world has been killing things for 4 billion years. Asteroids, radiation, viruses that mutate faster than medicine can track. We didn't evolve armor, we didn't evolve claws, we evolved something else. He moved. Pip would review the security footage later, frame by frame, searching for the technique. He would not find it. There was no technique, only economy. Only the brutal efficiency of a species that had learned to survive by any means necessary. Danny redirected the first heavy's momentum into the second. He used a knee to unbalance the third, a shoulder to drive the fourth into the wall. He moved through them not with dominance displays, not with theatrical violence, but with the plain functionality of a man who had spent his life making broken things work. 30 seconds, 7 attackers on the floor, none with broken bones, none with injuries that would not heal in a week. Danny stood over Corvith. The Bren heir was on his knees, massive frame twisted in a joint lock that looked almost gentle, almost kind, until you tried to move against it. I could kill all of you, Danny said. My ancestors learned 1,000 ways to end lives. They had to, the world demanded it. He released the lock, stepped back, offered his hand. But that is not what humans do, he said. Not anymore. We learned something better. We learned that the predator you choose is more powerful than the predator you fear. Corvith stared at the hand. His deep-set eyes tracked from the offered palm to Danny's face, searching for deception, searching for the trap that must surely be hidden in this gesture. He did not find it. Before he could answer, the temperature in Corridor 9B dropped 10 degrees. Nyx materialized from the shadows behind Danny. Her wings spread wide, heat-absorbent dermis drinking the maintenance light until the corridor seemed to darken around her. Her multi-spectrum eyes reflected nothing. You threatened our human, she whispered. The shadows moved. Ra's bioluminescent stripes blazed white, a light show of threat that turned the corridor into a kaleidoscope of warning. His 4 arms uncoiled from their ready state into full extension, claws extended, forked tongue tasting the air for the scent of fear he had already found. Seth's secondary legs extended, claws clicking against the plating in the rhythmic pattern of a Vorax hunt cadence. The jacket Danny had given him was still wrapped around his shoulders. His stripes pulsed the deep crimson of pack kinship defended. Gorith's dorsal nodes crackled, not the subsonic hum of contentment, the full-throated roar of a thunderstorm given physical form. Blue-white arcs jumped between his mineral plates and cast lightning shadows across the walls. We will remember your scent, Nyx said. Her whisper filled the corridor, intimate and absolute. All of you, forever. The Brens ran. Not retreated, not withdrew, ran. The 7 heavies scrambled over each other in their haste to escape the corridor, the shadows, the winged whisper that promised memory without forgiveness. Corvith was last, his planted stance forgotten, his family crest tattoo hidden behind the shoulder of a subordinate as they fled into the station's brighter passages. Danny watched them go. He looked at his empty hand, still extended, and lowered it slowly. Nice to know you were there, he said. Ra bowed his head. The gesture was slight, almost invisible, but Pip caught it. The Crixian's throat was exposed. The ultimate trust ritual of his people, offered not to a dominant predator but to a human who had just chosen mercy over massacre. Where one stands, Ra said, we all stand. Danny turned to face his pack. Seth's stripes warmed to gold. Gorith's nodes settled into the rhythmic pulse of recognition. Nyx's wing brushed his shoulder again, and this time the touch lingered. Pip noticed something. Danny's hand was empty. The thermos was gone. He had set it down somewhere in the moment before the confrontation, and in the aftermath he had not retrieved it. The human did not seem to notice, or perhaps he did not care. The final presentation was held in Classroom 7C, but the room had been transformed. The reinforced circle remained, but the seats had been rearranged. No longer predator and prey facing each other across an invisible line. Now they formed a crescent, Garden World students interspersed with Deathworlders, the geometry suggesting connection rather than confrontation. Instructor Paleth stood at the front. Her hands did not shake. When she looked at Danny, they steadied further. "The human packbonder phenomenon," she said, her wind chime voice carrying a new harmony. "This will be required study for all incoming cadets effective next semester." Pip sat in the front row, data pad ready. He had prepared a report on interspecies communication protocols. He had charts. He had citations from 17 academic journals. He did not open the file. Instead, he watched Danny sit with his pack. Seth had returned the jacket, but it hung on the back of Danny's chair, visible to everyone. Ra's bioluminescent stripes pulsed a calm blue, the color of deep water. Gorith's nodes hummed the subsonic thrum of contentment. Nick sat close enough that the temperature drop was noticeable but not uncomfortable, a deliberate choice of proximity. "You do not survive," Danny said, addressing the assembled cadets, "by being the biggest predator." He looked at each of his pack in turn. Seth's gold, Ra's blue, Gorith's rhythmic pulse, Nyx's silent presence. "You survive," he said, "by being the one the predators choose to protect." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the sound of rules rewriting themselves. Chief Varric stood at the back of the room. He did not update his data pad. He simply watched, scarred face unreadable, as the cadets processed what they had witnessed. 30 humans had been invited for next semester. 30 more Deathworld Class 12 students, carrying their own scars, their own habits of survival, their own potential to build what Danny had built. The Academy had prepared for dominance displays. It had prepared for territorial aggression. It had not prepared for this. Pip thought of the database entry, 94%. He thought of the drone, destroyed by a hand that bled into machinery rather than let it reach the innocent. He thought of the corridor where 7 attackers had fallen without a single bone broken and the offer of a hand that followed. He thought of coffee, of jackets, of mineral spirals and conductive paste and hands held in darkness. The class never spoke again about fear, only about hope. Years later, the thermos sat in the Academy's Hall of First Bonds. The dent was unchanged, the faded Earth script still legible after decades of station light. The coffee inside had long evaporated, leaving only a dark stain on the interior metal and a faint ghost of roasted scent that visitors sometimes claimed to catch. A young Fenari student pressed her nose to the display glass. Her ears were flat against her skull, the posture of a creature confronting something larger than herself, but her eyes were bright. They tracked the inscription with the focused attention of someone reading the first line of a curriculum taught across 12 systems. "Warmth is a choice." The station light caught the faded letters and held them.